Boy gains the worst abilities, but is forced to become powerful in another world. If you dig my recaps, don't forget to subscribe and smash that notification bell. A sarcastic and lonely young man named Haruka is thrown into another world against his will. Discovered by a group of goblins roasting a pig, the boy is forced to run for his life as the monsters chase after him. At one point, Haruka makes a large leap forward, hoping his plan works. Sure enough, when the goblins reach the spot Haruka had cleverly avoided, they fall into a trap he had dug earlier, tumbling into a hole. At that moment, Haruka is left trying to deal with this new universe he's been dragged into all on his own. Flashing back to the day he was teleported, Haruka was spending his break time as usual reading his manhwas alone. In other words, not only was he a loner in his original life, but he had to be one in another world too. Haruka had nothing in common with the people in his class. Almost everyone belonged to a group like the delinquents, the popular girls, the otakus, and the class representatives. And the rest? Well, they were just the rest. Yes, there were people like him who didn't fit into any group at all. That's when everything happened. A golden magic circle engulfed the entire classroom, ready to whisk everyone away to that crazy new universe. While everyone else had already gone into a panic, lazy Haruka took a while to even lift his head and notice the magical phenomenon happening around him. But once he did, instead of reacting like his classmates, he felt excited for a second, only to realize another world would probably be a drag after all. So he decided to run away. Or at least he tried, but no matter what he did, he couldn't force open the classroom door, which for some reason was locked. As everyone was being pulled into the teleportation, Haruka still held out hope that he could escape through the ceiling. He finally managed to open the ventilation duct and hoped to slip away, but it seems all his efforts were in vain as the magic circle spread and eventually caught up with him. Soon enough, he found himself in a classic all-white limbo-like place, the kind that serves as a gateway to another world. The kind where you'd probably find a fat king and his hot princess, the kind no nerd would ever stand a chance with in real life. Speaking of which, there was an old man in that place, seemingly looking for Haruka. He didn't speak with sounds, but rather his words appeared in text bubbles like in a video game. Apparently, he was some sort of god in this world, and Haruka's entire class had already been transported to the new world except for him. So the boy had to hurry up and decide his stats before he could head down. With that, a large status screen appeared in the limbo. Normally, each person would get 50 points to spend on skills and magic, but since this was the old man's first time dealing with 43 people at once, the overpowered abilities had already been taken, leaving only the worst one. In other words, even though Haruka had hoped to be a mage or a paladin, he had to settle for items like contact lenses or villager a set. As for weapons, among two-handed swords and deadly bows, he ended up with a staff that was basically just a stick. When it came to magic, his choices were well-being and walking. Frustrated, Haruka complained to the old man, who finally gave in and handed him all the remaining skills before sending the kid on his way. And so Haruka was finally thrown into an ice sky in the middle of a forest with the worst abilities, and absolutely no clue how to survive in a place like this. The first thing he saw was his villager a set, but to his surprise, the small bag could hold infinite items, and inside there were things like contact lenses, a cloak, a ring of the dead soul, and a jewel of knowledge. Haruka still thought all these items seemed pretty useless, but after putting on the cloak, he felt a little more connected to this world. He then tried to check his stats, but quickly remembered that in order to do that he needed to roll 2 dice, which would determine how many points he had to distribute far from the 50 he thought he would get. However, for some reason the dice rolled an M. Something he didn't even know the meaning of. Maybe it stood for masculinity, but it wasn't the time to speculate. He needed to assign his points. He didn't care about balancing his build, so he dumped everything into the luck attribute. As the stats were calculated, he realized his luck was incredibly high, leading him to deduce that the M on the dice meant maximum. On the other hand, all his other attributes remained terrible. At least he got an extra skill, subjugate, which allowed him to make others follow him. But since he was the last one thrown into this world, one of his character conditions was to survive on his own and not be able to form groups. That meant his dream of assembling a party full of girls in this ice sky was shattered too. Nevertheless, Haruka decided he needed to find a safe place to stay. But to navigate through the unfamiliar forest, he was definitely going to need the contact lenses from his infinite bag. When he put them on, he had no idea they had the ability of appraisal, allowing him to see the name category and usefulness of everything in this world. Surely this skill opened Haruka's eyes to this new reality, making him feel much more aware of what he was doing. With that, he gathered edible mushrooms that increased the user's abilities and stashed them in his infinite bag. At that moment, he apologized for ever dismissing the villager Aset, especially after discovering that the bag could also serve as a water bottle. After some more time adventuring, Haruka stumbles upon a cave and decides to explore it, but not without first asking for forgiveness from the monster that may live in this disguised dungeon, even though he prayed it was just an empty cave where he could settle. Taking a glance at his bag, the adventurer had a magical tent and a lantern, so he was halfway to setting up camp there once he ensured the place was vacant. Next, he gathered some branches and leaves to start a fire using his temperature ability to heat it. As he did this, the ability evolved into fire magic. In addition, he gained clairvoyance, perception, and enemy detection. Despite the pleasant surprise, the sleep that came over him might have caused Haruka to fall asleep in the middle of this hostile land with only a stick to defend himself. However, the exhaustion was so overwhelming that he had to take the risk, and that's how he survived his first day in this unknown world. The next morning, he woke up safe and sound because the tent and the lantern had abilities that acted as repellents for both insects and monsters, thanks to the recluse title he earned for being the last to arrive in the ice sky. Putting that aside, Haruka felt his stomach growl, so he lit a new fire and tossed the mushrooms and meat he had in his bag over it. With a bit of seasoning to boost the flavor, breakfast was soon ready. To top it off, he hadn't expected to have cooking utensils in his bag, so he imagined this villager A, who had originally owned the equipment, must have been a true survivor of the wilderness. Once he had satisfied his hunger, the adventurer had to decide where to go next, knowing that at least he had a place to stay. The next step was to find spots where he could gather food as well as improve the security of his shelter. The only issue was the monsters he might encounter along the way. Speaking of which, through his perception ability, he detected 2 goblins, marking his first challenge in this environment. Haruka assessed them to be level 8, which frustrated him even more as he thought these types of monsters would be easy XP for a noob. Nonetheless, he felt the need to learn how to fight as soon as possible, and this might be his chance. So with only a stick in hand, he used his sealing ability, which infused the weapon with magic. He figured that if he couldn't have overpower magic, he would become overpower himself. With that, Haruka charged at the first goblin, striking it on the head with a stick, and as the poor creature spun around like a bug, he finished it off. The second goblin rushed at the human, but Haruka easily dodged the simple, predictable attacks. Finally, he used a bit of his mana to channel energy through the stick and blasted the goblin, finishing the job. After the victory, the boy took a break by the river in the late afternoon. Surviving his first battle filled him with pride. Returning home, Haruka ate his mushrooms and checked out the wooden club he had taken from one of the goblins. However, he found the weapon small, heavy, and useless. Apparently, his stick was enough for now. At least he had leveled up to 2, which was progress. His stats had practically doubled, and he had also leveled up his weapon proficiency skill after pummeling the goblin. Not to mention his sensibility technique, which would prevent him from being caught off guard by goblins who might torment him like a damsel in distress. Additionally, he had gained magic coating after imbuing the staff with magic. Lastly, his calisthenics leveled up because he always stretched when he woke up. At least that's what he did this morning. The next day, Haruka couldn't bear to eat mushrooms anymore and thought about finding new food, but he imagined the class reps wouldn't approve of him wasting food, so he forced himself to swallow it all. Moving past that, he felt much stronger with his level 1 magic coating, as it allowed the user to enhance their physical abilities and magical defense. Surely every living soul in this world would line up at the market to snag a skill like that. On top of that, his appraisal also leveled up, which made him see question marks at the end of each equipment's name, something that in his opinion seemed much worse than before. However, not wanting to stress about it, Haruka set out to finally rid his diet of mushrooms, desperately searching for a decent piece of meat in this godforsaken world. Once he calmed down, he had the idea to use his magic coating, giving him the ability to run and jump with much more force, not to mention that his attacks had become noticeably faster. With this power, the boy went after more goblins and and took out 2. Feeling confident, he thought he could handle 3 at once, but as soon as he came across a trio of monsters, Haruka retreated and headed back home to train a bit more before diving into such a mess. In the following days, he hunted pairs of goblins in the morning and practiced his magic at night. By the 5th day, the adventurer could defeat a goblin in a single blow, and he had even decorated his base with magic, setting up a gate and everything for protection. One day, he finally found a rabbit in the forest and worked hard to catch the little thing so he could eat some meat after such a long time. With the animal in hand, the starving boy could already hear the sound of the pot sizzling, but his perception shifted his focus in another direction. This time, there weren't any monsters around, but rather the delinquents from Haruka's classroom, and it wasn't just them. Using clairvoyance, Haruka discovered that the class princesses, the muscleheads, the otakus, and the class reps were also nearby. Thinking about that last group, Haruka reflected that it might be better to travel as a team. He had known one of the class reps since their first day of school, so perhaps he should just approach them and try a friendly conversation. But he quickly dismissed the idea in favor of his isolation and freedom, where no one could tell him what to do. With that resolve in mind, Haruka decided he would become the lone master of this world. If you're enjoying this journey, don't forget to hit that like button. Your support helps motivate me to keep bringing you each episode. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. See you in the next episode.